Throw her out. The words sliced clean through the $30 million glass boardroom, sharp enough to silence even the low hum of the skyline beyond the windows, and for a moment, every polished executive at the table turned, not to the billionaire who spoke, but to the girl standing near the wall with a janitor's cart and a folded rag in her hand. Ava Johnson didn't move, not when security shifted their weight toward her. Not when a few quiet laughs slipped through pressed lips, because her eyes weren't on them. They were fixed on the contract resting beneath the billionaire's pen, the one he was seconds away from signing, the one everyone in the room had already agreed was flawless. You really think she understands any of this? Someone muttered barely above a whisper, but loud enough to ripple through the room like a low tide of contempt. Ava's fingers tightened slightly around the cloth, the faint scent of industrial cleaner still clinging to it, but her voice, when it came, was steady, almost too calm for someone who didn't belong there. If you sign that, your company collapses in 48 hours. The room didn't just go quiet, it froze, like the air itself had been pulled tight, stretched thin between disbelief and irritation. The billionaire, Richard Caldwell, didn't look up immediately, his pen hovering just above the paper, a man used to interruptions but not from someone like her, someone whose name wasn't on any list that mattered. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him, and finally turned his head, his gaze landing on Ava with the kind of measured curiosity reserved for something out of place. "Excuse me?" he said, not loud, not angry, just controlled, but the shift in the room was instant. Executives straightened, assistants paused mid-note, even the city beyond the glass seemed to blur. Ava stepped forward, just one step, enough for the overhead lights to catch the edge of her face, reflecting faintly in the polished table. "Page 14, she said, her voice cutting cleaner than the silence that followed. "Subsection C, line 3, it transfers all post-merger liability to your firm." A few heads turned. Someone scoffed softly, another reached for the document as if to prove her wrong. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That clause has been reviewed," he replied, his tone even, but now there was something beneath it, something thinner, sharper. "By people who don't expect it to be used," Ava answered, and that was when the laughter came, not loud, not explosive, but controlled, dismissive, the kind that says you've already lost before you've begun. One executive leaned back, shaking his head. "She cleans floors," he said, glancing around as if inviting agreement. "Now she's auditing billion-dollar contracts?" Ava didn't look at him, didn't react. Her focus never left Richard, because she had already seen it, hours earlier, under fluorescent lights and the quiet rhythm of night shift cleaning, a document left open, a clause buried deep enough to pass unnoticed unless you were looking for it, unless you knew what it meant. "Sign it," someone said lightly, trying to break the tension. "Let's not waste time." Richard's pen lowered an inch closer to the paper, and for a second, it seemed like that would be it. The moment would pass, she would be escorted out, and the room would return to its comfortable certainty. But then Ava spoke again, softer this time, almost like a warning meant for only one person. "It's not protection," she said. "It's a trap." And something in the room shifted, not visibly, not completely, but enough, just enough, that Richard's hand stopped, the tip of his pen hovering in place, suspended between decision and doubt, and for the first time since she spoke, he looked down at the contract, really looked at it, as if seeing it not as a deal already won, but as something that might still be hiding its truth. Richard Caldwell did not sign, his pen remained suspended just above the paper, the faint reflection of the skyline trembling along the polished table as if the city itself was waiting for his decision, and across from him, one of the senior attorneys finally reached for the contract, flipping to page 14 with a controlled urgency that tried to look routine but felt anything but. The thin pages whispered under his fingers, a soft, almost fragile sound in a room built on certainty. "This has already been cleared," another executive insisted, his voice tight, defensive, as if repeating it might make it true, but the attorney did not respond, his eyes scanning line by line, slower now, more deliberate, the kind of reading that happens when doubt has already entered the room. Ava stood still near the edge of the table, her cart parked behind her like a reminder of where she was supposed to be, her posture straight, her Breathing steady, she did not look around, did not search for support, because she already understood something they did not, that truth did not need permission to exist. Only someone willing to say it out loud. Richard's gaze shifted between the attorney and the page, his confidence not gone but thinning, like ice under weight. "Well?" he asked finally, his voice calm but no longer untouched. The attorney paused, just for a fraction too long, then adjusted his glasses. "The language is ambiguous," he said carefully, and that single word changed everything. A ripple moved through the room, subtle but undeniable. Chairs creaked, someone leaned forward, another sat back, the earlier laughter now replaced by something quieter, something sharper. Ava's eyes did not leave the contract, because she knew exactly where he would stop, exactly which line would catch, exactly how long it would take for realization to settle in, and then it happened. The attorney's finger halted mid-sentence, his jaw tightening slightly, his silence louder than any reaction that could have followed. "Read it," Richard said more firmly now, the authority returning but altered, no longer dismissive, now demanding clarity. The attorney swallowed, then spoke. "Subsection C allows retroactive reassignment of liability under compliance review, which effectively places all risk on us." The last two words landed heavy, like something dropped from a height, and the room did not explode. It did not panic, it did something far more dangerous. It went still, completely still, as if every person present was recalculating everything they thought they knew. Richard leaned forward slowly, his pen now resting against the paper but no longer moving, his eyes scanning the clause himself, reading not as a formality but as a man who understood exactly what it meant to lose millions in a single overlooked sentence. Across the table, someone muttered, "That cannot be right." But no one laughed this time, no one dismissed it, because the evidence was sitting there in black and white, undeniable. Ava finally exhaled softly, not in relief, but in quiet confirmation. She had seen this before, not in boardrooms like this, not under chandeliers and glass walls, but in textbooks, in late nights spent studying contracts that determined who survived and who did not. She had walked away from that world once, forced to, but knowledge did not disappear just because opportunity did, and now it stood here with her, in a room that never expected to hear her voice. Richard looked up again, this time directly at her, not through her, not past her, but at her, really seeing her for the first time. The janitor uniform, the worn shoes, the calm expression that had not cracked even when the room laughed. "How did you catch that?" he asked, and there was no mockery left in his tone, only something unfamiliar, something closer to respect mixed with disbelief. Ava did not answer immediately. Her eyes flicked briefly to the contract, then back to him. "Because it is written to be missed," she said quietly, and that answer did not just explain the clause, it exposed the entire illusion the room had been operating under. That expertise was always visible, that intelligence always wore the right title, and for a moment, no one spoke, because the truth had already said everything that needed to be said. No one moved at first, not even the assistants by the wall, because something invisible had shifted in the room and everyone felt it at the same time, like pressure before a storm. Richard Caldwell slowly set his pen down on the table, the soft click echoing louder than it should have, and for a brief second he looked not like a man in control, but like someone recalculating everything in real time. "Get me the full risk breakdown," he said, his voice low but firm, and this time no one questioned him. No one laughed. Laptops opened, fingers moved quickly across screens, the earlier confidence replaced by a quiet urgency that spread from one end of the table to the other. Ava stepped back slightly, not out of fear, but because her role here, the one she was never meant to have, had already been fulfilled, yet her presence lingered, heavy, undeniable, like a truth that could not be pushed out once spoken. One of the executives who had laughed earlier now avoided looking in her direction, his posture tighter, his voice lower as he spoke to the attorney beside him. "How did we miss that?" he whispered, but the answer hung in the air before anyone could say it, because they had not been looking for it, not really. They had trusted the process, the reputation, the assumption that someone else had already done the deeper thinking, and in that gap, the trap had been placed perfectly. Richard stood up slowly, the movement drawing every eye back to him, his suit catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. But there was something different now, not weaker, not uncertain, but sharper, more focused. He picked up the contract and flipped the pages himself, his fingers moving with deliberate control, as if refusing to be caught off guard again. "Cancel the signing," he said, and this time the words did not cut through the room. They settled into it, firm and final, a decision that did not need to be repeated. Across the table, a senior partner opened his mouth as if to object, then closed it again, because there was no ground left to stand on. The facts had already spoken. Ava turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward the glass wall where the city stretched endlessly below, cars moving like threads of light, people walking lives that would never intersect with rooms like this, and for a moment, she felt the familiar distance again. The invisible line between where she stood and where decisions like this were made, but it did not feel the same anymore, not after what had just happened. "Wait!" Richard's voice came again, not commanding this time, but deliberate, and she paused, turning back just enough to meet his eyes. The room watched in silence, because now the dynamic had shifted completely, not just in power, but in perception. "You said 48 hours?" he continued, his tone measured. "Why that timeline?" Ava held his gaze steady, grounded, and for the first time since she had spoken, there was a faint shift in her expression, not pride, not relief, but something closer to clarity. "Because once the clause activates," she said, "it triggers a compliance review window, and that opens the door for liability transfer within 2 days. The precision of her answer landed with weight, not because it was complex, but because it was exact, informed, undeniable. A few heads turned again, this time not in doubt, but in recognition, recognizing knowledge when they heard it. Richard studied her for a moment longer, as if trying to place her within a system that no longer fit, then asked quietly, "Where did you learn that?" The question was simple, but the room leaned into it, because the answer mattered more than anything that had been said so far. Ava's grip on the cloth and her hand loosened slightly, the fabric soft against her fingers, a small, almost grounding detail in a moment that had already shifted too much. She could feel the weight of every eye on her now, not dismissing, not mocking, but searching, and after a brief pause, she answered, her voice calm, unshaken. "From the same place you did," she said. "I just never got to stay." The room did not return to normal after that. It could not, because something deeper than a contract had just been exposed, and Richard Caldwell felt it in the way no one rushed to speak, in the way even the quiet hum of the air system seemed louder than before. He studied Ava Johnson as if trying to reconcile two completely different realities into one, the uniform, the cart, the cloth in her hand, and the precision of her words that had just saved him from a decision worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "What do you mean you never got to stay?" he asked, his voice no longer carrying authority as a weapon, but curiosity as a necessity. Ava did not answer immediately, not because she did not have an answer, but because some truths did not belong in rooms like this, not polished, not packaged, just lived. She glanced briefly at the long table, at the rows of people who had spent years building their place here, and then back at him. "I studied corporate law," she said quietly, the words simple, almost too simple for what they carried. A few executives shifted in their seats, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the discomfort settling in. "Full scholarship," she continued. "Top of my class for 2 years." The room absorbed that information slowly, like something that did not fit the narrative they had already accepted. Richard's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough, the sharp edges of assumption softening into something more complex. "So what happened?" he asked, and this time the question was not about business, it was about her. Ava's fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the cart, grounding herself in something physical, something real. "Life happened," she said, her tone steady, not bitter, not apologetic, just factual. "My mother got sick. Medical bills stacked up, I left school to work, and once you step out, it is not easy to step back in." No one interrupted, no one tried to fill the silence that followed, because the truth of that statement did not need explanation, it simply existed, heavy and undeniable. Richard exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling differently now, not just as a near financial loss avoided, but as something else, something harder to quantify, a realization that the system he trusted did not always recognize value where it stood. "And you have been working here?" he asked, glancing briefly at the cart behind her. Ava nodded once. "Night shifts mostly," she replied. "Cleaning offices, conference rooms, whatever needs to be done." The contrast between her words and the room around them was impossible to ignore, a space filled with million-dollar decisions, and the person who had just protected one of them had been invisible inside it. Richard walked slowly around the table, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate, until he stood a few feet from her, close enough now that the distance between their roles felt smaller, or at least less certain. "You read contracts during your shift?" he asked, and there was no accusation in it, only an attempt to understand. Ava gave a slight nod. "When they are left open," she said. "I do not go looking for them, but when I see something wrong, I cannot pretend I did not." That answer settled into the room with a quiet force, because it was not ambition speaking, it was integrity, something that did not depend on position or title. Richard looked at her for a long moment, the silence stretching, not uncomfortable, but significant, like something was being decided that had nothing to do with the documents still resting on the table. "Most people would have stayed quiet," he said finally, and Ava met his gaze without hesitation. "Most people are allowed to," she replied, and that single sentence carried more weight than anything else she had said, because it revealed the difference not just in opportunity, but in expectation. The room felt it, every person there understood it, even if no one said a word. Richard straightened slightly, his posture shifting back into something familiar, but not unchanged. "Come back tomorrow," he said, his tone measured. "9 a.m. my office." A few heads turned, surprised, uncertain, but no one questioned him. Not now. Ava paused, just for a moment, as if weighing something unseen, then gave a small nod, not eager, not hesitant, just acknowledging, and as she turned to leave, pushing the cart quietly toward the door, the room did not dismiss her this time, it watched her, because, for the first time, they understood that she had never been out of place, they had simply failed to see where she truly belonged. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, sealing Ava Johnson into a quiet that felt heavier than the boardroom she had just left, the faint hum of the descent echoing in the narrow space as her reflection stared back at her from the brushed steel walls. Janitor uniform, tired eyes, steady posture. Nothing about her appearance had changed, and yet everything had shifted. She looked down at her hands, still holding the cloth she had carried all night, the fabric slightly damp, the scent of cleaner still clinging to it, grounding her in a reality she understood, because whatever had just happened upstairs did not erase the life waiting for her when the doors opened, the long hallways, the quiet offices, the routine she had repeated for months without being seen. The elevator reached the service level and opened to fluorescent light and familiar silence, a stark contrast to the glass and skyline above. She stepped out, pushing her cart forward, the wheels rolling softly against the tile floor. As if nothing had happened at all, but it had, and she could feel it. In the way her thoughts refused to settle, replaying every second, every word, not with doubt, but with awareness of what it meant. Upstairs, Richard Caldwell remained standing near the head of the table, the contract still open in front of him, but untouched. The room had not fully resumed its rhythm. Conversations were quieter now, more measured, executives speaking in low tones, recalculating, adjusting. But his attention was elsewhere, fixed on the space where Ava had stood just minutes before. "Run a full audit on every clause in that document," he said finally, his voice steady again, but changed. "I want independent review, no assumptions." Heads nodded quickly, efficiently, but there was a new edge to the compliance, something closer to respect than routine. One of the senior partners leaned forward slightly. "You are really considering bringing her in?" he asked carefully, choosing his words with precision. Richard did not answer right away, his gaze shifting briefly to the city beyond the glass, the movement below constant, relentless, millions of people moving through lives unseen, unheard, until something forced the world to look at them differently. "She saw what all of you missed," he said at last, not accusing, not raising his voice, just stating a fact that did not need emphasis. The partner leaned back, silent, because there was no argument for that. Back on the lower floor, Ava moved through the empty corridor, stopping at an office she had cleaned countless times before. She stepped inside, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air, a half-empty cup still resting on the desk, a stack of papers left slightly out of place. She set her card aside and began her routine, wiping surfaces, straightening items, movements precise and practiced, but her mind drifted, not to what she had done, but to what came next. The invitation had been simple: 9 a.m., his office, no explanation, no promise, and that uncertainty sat quietly beneath everything else. She had learned not to expect doors to stay open just because they had once been unlocked. She had seen how quickly opportunity could disappear, how easily it could be taken back. She finished the room and moved to the next, the hours passing in steady rhythm, the building growing quieter as night deepened, until finally, her shift ended. She stepped outside into the cool early morning air, the city just beginning to wake, a faint orange glow rising along the horizon. She paused on the sidewalk, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder, the weight familiar, the street around her filled with people heading to jobs, to responsibilities, to lives that moved forward whether they were ready or not. She took a breath, slow and steady, and started walking, not faster, not slower, just forward, because whatever tomorrow brought, she knew one thing with absolute clarity: she had not spoken to be seen, she had spoken because it was right, and that was something no one could take from her, no matter what happened next. The next morning did not arrive with certainty. It arrived with quiet, pale lights slipping through the thin curtains of Ava Johnson's small apartment, tracing soft lines across the worn wooden floor as the city outside slowly came to life. She was already awake before the alarm sounded, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands resting loosely in her lap, her uniform neatly folded beside her, and for a moment she just listened. To the distant hum of traffic, to footsteps in the hallway, to the ordinary rhythm of a world that had no idea what had shifted the night before. She stood and moved through her routine with practiced calm, brushing her hair back, choosing a simple blouse she had not worn in months, one she used to wear to classes that now felt like a different lifetime. The fabric still fit, but it carried memories heavier than its weight. She paused in front of the small mirror, her reflection steady, composed, not transformed, just clearer, as if something inside her had realigned. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind that carried a hint of possibility without promising anything. She walked the few blocks to the subway, blending into the morning crowd, people moving with purpose, eyes forward, no one noticing her, the same as always, and yet not the same at all. Because today she was not just passing through the city, she was walking towards something that had once been taken from her. The train ride was short, the motion familiar, the stops predictable, and when she stepped out onto the street near the tower, the building rose above her like it always had, tall, reflective, untouchable. She stopped at the entrance for just a second, not hesitating, just acknowledging the distance she had already crossed to stand there again. Inside, the lobby was bright, polished, filled with quiet movement, receptionists speaking in low tones, security scanning badges, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from a corner stand. She approached the desk, her voice calm as she gave her name. The receptionist glanced up, then down at the screen, and something shifted in her expression, subtle but clear. "You are expected," she said, and that small sentence carried more weight than it should have. Ava nodded once and stepped toward the elevators, this time not the service one, the main one, the doors opening with a soft chime, reflecting her back at herself in a different light. The ride up felt longer, not because of distance, but because of everything it represented, each floor passing like a quiet count towards something undefined. When the doors opened, the hallway was quiet, carpet soft underfoot, the air cooler, more controlled. She followed the direction given to her, each step steady, each breath even, until she reached the office, the door slightly ajar. She knocked once, gentle but certain. "Come in." Richard Caldwell's voice answered from inside, and as she stepped through the doorway, the space felt different from the boardroom, less performative, more contained, walls lined with books, a wide desk positioned near the window, the city stretching endlessly behind him. He stood as she entered, not out of formality, but something closer to recognition, his posture composed, but his expression no longer distant. "You came," he said, simple, direct. Ava met his gaze, her voice just as steady. "You asked me to," she replied, and for a moment the room held that exchange without interruption, because this was no longer about a contract, or a mistake avoided, it was about what came after, the space between. Where she had been and where she might go next, and neither of them rushed to fill it, because some moments required stillness before anything else could begin. Richard did not sit immediately, instead he walked slowly around his desk, each step measured, as if he was adjusting to a reality that had not existed for him 24 hours ago. Ava remained where she was, standing near the chair across from him, her posture straight but not rigid, her eyes steady, the silence between them not empty but deliberate. "I had the contract reviewed again," he said finally, his voice calm, stripped of the performance it carried in the boardroom. 3 independent teams, no internal bias. He paused, not for effect, but because the weight of what he was about to say required precision. Every one of them confirmed the same thing. Ava did not respond, but something in her stillness acknowledged the direction of his words. He continued, "If I had signed it, we would have absorbed liabilities exceeding $200 million within 48 hours. The number settled into the room like a quiet verdict, not dramatic, but undeniable. Ava's expression did not change, not because it meant nothing, but because she had already understood the scale when she first saw the clause. "You did not just interrupt a meeting," Richard said, his gaze fixed on her now. "You prevented a collapse." The statement hung there, not exaggerated, not softened, just true. Ava shifted her weight slightly, her hands resting naturally at her sides. "I pointed out what was there," she replied, her voice even, grounded, and that answer, simple as it was, reframed everything again, because it was not about heroics, it was about clarity, about seeing what others overlooked. Richard studied her for a moment longer, then reached toward his desk. Picking up a thin folder, he walked back and placed it on the table between them, the motion calm, intentional. "I asked Human Resources to pull your file," he said, not as a warning, but as context. Ava's eyes flicked briefly to the folder, then back to him, her expression unchanged. "There is not much there," he continued. "Basic employment records. Background check, no mention of law school, no mention of academic standing." Ava exhaled softly through her nose, not surprised, just confirming what she already knew. "Because it does not matter for the job I was hired to do," she said, and again, her answer did not challenge him, it clarified the system itself. Richard nodded once, slowly, absorbing that. "That is exactly the problem," he replied, and there was no defensiveness in his tone now, only recognition. He opened the folder briefly, then closed it again, as if the contents were no longer relevant compared to what stood in front of him. "I built this company on the belief that talent should be identified and used efficiently," he said, his voice steady, but quieter now. "And yet you were here for months, and no one saw you." Ava held his gaze, not accusing, not validating, just present, because she had lived that reality long before he recognized it. "They saw what they expected to see," she said, and the words did not carry bitterness, only truth. Richard let out a slow breath, the kind that marked a shift in understanding, not just of her, but of himself. "And I was no different," he admitted, and for the first time, the distance between them was not defined by position, but by honesty. The room seemed to settle around that admission, the air quieter, clearer. "I am not interested in offering you gratitude," he continued, his tone firm again, but not cold. "Gratitude is temporary, and it does not change anything." Ava's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus, because now the conversation had moved beyond acknowledgement, into something else entirely. "I am interested in correcting a mistake," he said, and he let those words stand on their own for a moment, before continuing. "Not the contract," he added. "That one is obvious." His gaze did not leave hers. "The mistake of not seeing you when you were already here." The weight of that statement did not come from volume, but from its precision, because it named something deeper than a single oversight. Ava did not respond immediately, Because this was the moment where intention and reality often separated, where words could sound right, but lead nowhere. She had seen that before, lived it. "What does that correction look like to you?" she asked, her voice calm but direct, and the question shifted the balance again, placing the next move entirely in his hands. Richard did not hesitate this time. "It looks like giving you a seat at the table you already earned," he said, and there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just a decision that had already been made before she walked into the room, and the silence that followed was not empty, it was full of everything that had led to this moment, and everything that would come after it. The words did not echo, they settled, steady and irreversible, and for a moment Ava Johnson did not move, not because she did not understand what he was offering, but because she understood it too well. A seat at the table was not just a chair, it was expectation, visibility, pressure, and a system that had already once closed its doors on her without hesitation. She held Richard Caldwell's gaze, her expression calm, but her thoughts precise, measured, weighing not the opportunity itself, but the cost that came with it. "You are offering me a position," she said slowly, not as a question, but as a clarification. Richard nodded once. "Legal risk analysis," he replied. "Entry point, but with direct reporting to my office until you are fully placed." His tone was clear, structured, already mapped out, but Ava did not respond immediately. Her eyes shifted briefly to the window behind him, the city stretching out in layers of glass and motion, a place that rewarded speed, confidence, certainty, all things she had learned, all things she had once lived inside, and then lost. "And what happens when I make people uncomfortable?" she asked, her voice still even, but sharper now, because that was the part no contract ever stated, the part no offer letter included, the reality of walking into a space that had never expected her to speak. Richard did not look away. "Then they learn to be uncomfortable," he said, without hesitation, and that answer, simple as it was, carried more weight than any title he could have offered, because it did not promise ease, it acknowledged resistance. Ava let out a slow breath, not relief, not hesitation, just a release of something internal, something that had been held tight for a long time. "I did not speak yesterday to get here," she said, her voice steady, grounded. "I spoke because it was right." Richard nodded again. "That is exactly why you should be here," he replied, and there was no urgency in his tone, no pressure, just a statement that stood on its own. The room felt quieter now, not empty, but settled, like a decision was forming without being forced. Ava looked down briefly, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table, the surface smooth, cool, real. She had stood on the other side of this world before, not physically, but mentally, academically. She had understood it, prepared for it, until life had redirected everything, and now it was here again, not the same, but not entirely different either. "I will not be the person who stays silent to keep a seat," she said finally, lifting her gaze back to him, her words clear, not defensive, not challenging, just defined. Richard's expression did not change, but something in his posture confirmed he had expected nothing less. "Good," he said, "because that is not the person I am asking for." The clarity between them settled into something mutual, not agreement for the sake of opportunity, but understanding of what this would actually require. Ava nodded once, small, but certain, not as acceptance of him, but as alignment with herself. "Then I will come back," she said, and the words were simple, but they marked a shift, not from doubt to certainty, but from hesitation to decision. Richard stepped back slightly, giving the space back to her, not as dismissal, but as respect. "Human resources will handle the formalities," he said, "but your work starts before that." He gestured lightly toward the desk, where another file now rested, separate from the first, untouched, waiting. "There are more contracts that need to be seen clearly." Ava followed his gesture, her eyes resting on the file for a brief moment, not overwhelmed, not intimidated, just aware, and as she reached for it, the movement was steady, controlled, like someone stepping back into a role they had never truly left. And in that quiet office, with the city moving endlessly beyond the glass, something had shifted fully into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Because this was no longer about being allowed into the room, it was about changing what the room expected to see. The file in Ava Johnson's hands felt heavier than it should have, not because of its size, but because of what it represented, a continuation, not of what had happened, but of what would now be expected from her. She did not open it immediately, instead she held it for a moment, her fingers resting along the edge as if grounding herself in the present before stepping fully into it. Richard Caldwell had already returned to his desk, not turning away from her, but giving her the space to decide. Without pressure, the city behind him stretched endlessly, sunlight now brighter against the glass, reflecting movement, possibility, consequence. Ava finally opened the file, her eyes scanning the first page, then the next, her focus immediate, precise, the same way it had been the night before. But this time no one questioned why she was reading, no one laughed. The silence in the room carried a different weight now. One built on recognition, not dismissal. Minutes passed without either of them speaking, the only sound the faint turning of paper, the soft shift of fabric as she adjusted her stance, and then she stopped, not dramatically, not abruptly, just a pause that meant something had been found. Richard watched, not interrupting, not guiding, just observing the process that had already proven itself. Ava lifted her gaze slightly, not fully meeting his eyes yet. Still anchored in the document. "This clause is structured differently," she said, her voice calm, analytical. "But it creates the same outcome under a different trigger." Richard leaned forward slightly, his attention sharpening, not out of doubt, but out of trust in what she saw. "Explain," he said, and there was no authority in the word, only focus. Ava stepped closer to the desk, placing the file down between them, her finger resting lightly on a section of text. "It delays the exposure," she said. "But once activated, it limits response time to less than 24 hours. The precision of her explanation settled into the space, not dramatic, but exact. Richard nodded slowly, absorbing it, then leaned back, a quiet exhale leaving him, not in frustration, but in realization. "So it was not just one mistake," he said, more to himself than to her. Ava shook her head slightly. "It was a pattern," she replied, and that word shifted everything again, because patterns were not accidents, they were intentional, designed, repeated until they went unnoticed. Richard stood, walking toward the window, his reflection merging with the city beyond, the weight of what had almost happened now fully understood, not just a single oversight, but a system that had nearly failed him more than once. Behind him, Ava closed the file, her hands resting on it for a brief moment, not claiming it, not distancing herself from it, just acknowledging the work that lay ahead. The room remained quiet, not empty, but complete, because everything that needed to be said had already been spoken. Richard turned back, his expression composed, but different from the man who had stood in the boardroom the day before. "We fix it," he said simply, and the words did not carry urgency, they carried direction. Ava nodded once, not as agreement to him, but as alignment with the truth in front of her. She picked up the file again, her grip steady, her posture unchanged, but something within her had settled into place, not as a transformation, but as a return. The door behind her remained open, the hallway beyond quiet, waiting, and as she walked toward it, not rushing, not hesitating, the light from the office followed her just long enough to cast her reflection against the glass wall outside, her name badge catching the edge of it. Ava Johnson. Small, simple, but no longer invisible, and as she continued down the corridor, the sound of her steps soft against the carpet, the silence around her was not empty, it was full of something that did not need words, because for the first time, the truth had not only been seen, it had been allowed to stay.